Charles, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Nice to see you.
Charles Vivian is an experienced and inspiring business leader. And in 2017, the UK Business Awards named him the UK's Inspirational Business Leader of the Year. And he recently became the managing director of Roboyo in the UK. Roboyo is a global leader in business process automation. Before that, Charles ran North Highland's UK and Northeast America business, focusing on consulting largely in the project and program space. And before that, he transformed their whole project and program practice. I first met Charles back in the mid-1990s when we both worked for Deloitte, and Charles joined a project that was the first large project that I was able to lead at Deloitte. So we go back a long way, and we have stayed in touch. And through all of that time, I've observed that what Charles has done through all his ventures is take a real interest in the people working with him and for him. And that's the reason why I wanted to speak to Charles about high-performing project teams. So Charles, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. Looking forward to it.
Charles, I want to start off with the basics. When we talk about teams, what do we mean by high performance? Or I suppose, what do you mean by high performance?
Yeah, sure, Mike. I'd actually like to start with just a bit of not a caveat, but positioning. I'd say I'm not an expert in high performing teams. I'm not always in high performing teams, and I'm not professing to be the highest performing individual. But it is a subject that really interests me, and I've studied it over the past 30 years in my career. And as you'll hear, I've been fortunate to work in and be part of some exceptionally high-performing teams, some that haven't been. So it's a topic that fascinates me and interests me, and hopefully I can share some of that with you today.
Yeah. Interestingly, as a trainer, one of the things I know is that people tend to learn more from when they make mistakes.
Yeah, spot on. Spot on. Yeah, absolutely. So to your question, what do I mean by high performance? I think for me, there are two elements to it. It's pretty straightforward. The first element is results. So I think high performance is about outputs and outcomes, and those being sustained. I think any team can have peaks and troughs. The peak could be considered high performance, but for me, it's about sustainable results and performance.
Yeah.
And I think the other piece around those is that they tend to be a shared and collective success. They're not linked to an individual. It's about the whole unit. They've all contributed. They all feel like they've contributed, and they all celebrate and share in that success. So I think the first thing is, high performance is about delivering those results.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is the experience of getting there. So the first is the what. The second is the how. Because I think in high performing teams, there's definitely hard work. I don't believe you get anything without the hard work. But I think you can get results, and it can feel really difficult and unpleasant getting there.
Yeah.
Or you can get results, and it can be a growth experience. It can be interesting. It can be exciting. It can be something that you use as a cornerstone reference point. And I think high performing teams tend to create that type of experience for their team members. So two things: the what and the how.
Yeah, and I think I'd pick out on that kind of how element of it comes through hard work. Anyone who's part of my community will know that I bang on about this. You don't become a great project manager overnight. In fact, even when you are a great project manager, you still have to keep working at it. You otherwise you will not only lose your edge over other project managers, but you will start to rust. And that kind of hard work for me means that creating a high-performing team is only really the start of the process, isn't it? It's about maintaining it. So, but why does it matter? Why do we want a high-performing team, particularly on projects?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a lot of data around this, and if we want to get in touch, we can share a bit more of that. But McKinsey have got a stat which says that high-performing teams are 1.9 times likely to achieve their goals than lower performing teams, and they've got models around what that looks like. So I think you want a team because a high performing team, because the chances of achieving that output and outcome is more greatly increased.
Yeah.
I think that, there's other dynamics. you look at businesses today or enterprises today, it's competition for talent. So if you want to attract the best people, you want to bring them to a workplace where they feel like they're part of that high performance environment.
Yeah.
I think there's pressure within every organization to do more, quicker, for less or with less.
Yeah.
Therefore, high performing teams by their nature tend to be more productive. So I think all of those things are important. People want to be part of them because it tends to be where you get your growth and you find your reference points that then you use as you go through your career. And then the other data point I have is you mentioned at the outset, use the word inspiration, and that is an area that I've studied quite a lot. And there is data to show that inspired teams are 53%, or inspired individuals are 53% more productive, motivated, and creative than uninspired individuals.
Wow.
For me, a high-performing team has got people. What does inspiration mean? It's to do with your level of engagement, excitement, sense of purpose. And I think that's at the core of a high-performing team. I think good leaders inspire people.
Yeah.
So if you can get your team to that position, you get that lift, tremendous lift in productivity, motivation, and creativity, which is incredibly powerful. So there's a bit in there, but those are some of the reasons.
Yeah. And of course, I don't think we should forget the fact that, as project managers or as leaders of any sort, we come to work, we want to enjoy what we're doing. And it's so much easier. But that point about inspirational motivation, I think that one of my favorite models of leadership that applies to project managers is the idea of transformational leadership, because not only are we trying to transform the teams we work with from day one as a bunch of individuals to early on, as early as possible in the project, a high-performing team, but also we're often trying to transform parts of the organizations that are commissioning the projects from us. And of course, one aspect of James McGregor Burns' version of transformational leadership is that inspirational motivation. Is as a leader, that is a big part of your role if you want to transform your team. So I like that.
Actually, Mike, can I come back on a couple of points there?
Of course.
Is that okay? Yeah. So I should have opened with a belief. So I have a belief that actually everyone can be high performing, and every team can be high performing. So so I think it's about finding the right environment and adopting the right mindset, and anyone can do that. So I think that's quite an important foundation for this. And then to your point around inspirational leadership, I have a slightly different perspective. So actually, I think, what I've read is that anyone has the ability to inspire anyone else. You shouldn't just be looking to leaders to inspire you. And actually, the one model for inspiration is approaching every conversation with 4 Ps, which are purposefully, with passion, be present, and make it personal. And actually, if you approach a dialogue with that, anyone has the ability to inspire anyone else and unlock that 53% extra productivity, creativity, and motivation. So I think it's a very simple tool to create inspiration and performance within a team.
But let me turn that around. I mean, you say everyone has the ability to inspire everyone else. I think everyone has the ability to lead, and you don't have to be the leader to be a leader. And maybe what we mean by leadership, or part of what we mean by leadership, is simply the willingness to inspire the people around you.
It could be a dimension. I completely agree with what you said about everyone having the ability to lead. I think the big thing you learn and that enables you to blossom as a leader is self-awareness. So I think it's about understanding what you're good at and what you're not good at, and then surrounding yourself with people that can fill that leadership gap, and then that allows everyone to lead. And there are lots of different leadership situations. So different business states or project states require different types of leaders. So I think be aware about what your leadership strengths are and your gaps, build a team around you so you can lead. And then potentially have the self-awareness to understand when a leadership situation is something that you'll be suited to, and something when you wouldn't be suited to. So I think that those are all key points. But yes, everyone can lead.
Okay. So I think you hinted earlier that you had some examples of where you've been involved in high and maybe not so high performing teams. I think it'd be a good time to just share some of those examples. Give us an insight perhaps into what the high and low performing teams look like, and what we can actually see as artifacts of a high performing team.
Yeah, I mean, some I've been involved in, some I've observed, and probably in each case there's probably one characteristic that stands out to me, and I think it's just some good examples. So I had the good fortune to meet an ex-CIO of, well, I'll name check him, Sainsbury's, and he was talking to me about the period in Sainsbury's, which I think ran from 2008 to 2013. It was under the Justin King era. I might have got the date slightly wrong.
Yeah.
But he talks about that leadership team being a high-performing team and really being at the peak of its powers. And I think if you look at the share price, so back to my point about results and how much market share they gained during that period of time, you can see that they were clearly doing something right.
Yeah.
They were taking ground from their competitors. And the thing that I remember him talking to was about people playing to their strengths. And he said there were 5 people in that leadership team. He was the CIO. They were all being asked to play to their strengths, not to do things that weren't their strengths.
Yeah.
And there was a mutual respect amongst that team. And I think that always stood out to me as a real sort of macro enterprise level example.
Yeah.
Couple of others. One team I did work with was my operations team in North Highland in London. So worked with about 5 individuals that covered everything from staffing to operational management to recruitment. And for me, that was a high performing team. And reasons for that. One was the mutual trust, and we'll talk more about that, between the individuals.
Yeah.
2 came down to expertise. So they were all very, very good at their craft. And then 3 was the culture we created, culture, vision, purpose, mission we created within that team.
Yeah.
Which can become very, very bonding and is very foundational to performance. Yeah. We also created, it was a simple thing, but an environment of psychological safety, and we co-located in one room. So there's some environmental factors around why that team performed well.
Yeah.
Probably 2 others for you. I know you love your sports metaphors, Mike. So I'm a big England rugby fan. Clive Wood would obviously coach the team in the World Cup success in 2003.
So I think we should say to our American viewers that rugby is kind of like American football, but done properly.
Yes. Okay, I agree. But he's written a brilliant book on that journey to becoming world champions, proper world champions. And he talks about taking the team to train with the Royal Marines, which for our American listeners, it's our elite, sort of one of our elite army regiments in the UK. And at the end of that training session, he asked the Royal Marines, what did you think of the team? And they said, we separate people into 2 types of characters. You have radiators and you have drains. And they basically said, radiators put energy into a team and drains take energy out of a team. And he asked for the names of the 4 drains. He dropped them from the team and England won the World Cup. Now, there was obviously lots of other bits to that story, but I do believe in that the sort of energy that surrounds a team and the positivity and people putting in rather than detracting from a team environment. So I think that's key for high performance.
That's a nice one, because in the kind of world of work, I think a lot of people will have come across Adam Grant's ideas of givers and takers, and the metaphor is slightly different and the detail is slightly different. The principle, I think, is the same, that giving and taking from the team. And if everyone on the team is giving, then it just kind of lifts the whole thing up.
Yeah. And I think one has to be realistic. So you can't expect everyone to be up all of the time. No. But I think the balance needs to be around positivity and can-do attitude. And then you need to support and recognize when people are down. But it's a really important ingredient. And
I think that I was going to say I think, and you can't always drop team members as easily as perhaps a sports coach or manager can. But it's not so much about whether the team does or doesn't have its ups and downs, because it will. Yeah. It's the kind of base position of the team members. If you can get a team where all of the members are at base primary givers, and then you're in a good place, because when they go down, other people will lift them back up. If you're constantly taking from the team, that's where.
And that base and the culture also dictates how you respond to the downs.
Yeah.
So you can decide to, somebody used a great phrase with me last week, which actually was a quite senior partner at Deloitte. Uh-huh. And he said he had a piece of coaching, which was he shied away from confrontation and challenge. Yeah. And when he got that, he decided he was going to change his mindset and he would walk towards a fire.
Yeah.
And he made up and he came up with a visualization for that. So he decided to start embracing conflict and challenge.
Yeah.
And he changed his mindset. And I think you're able to do that. And and sometimes the difficult things are the things that give you the most rewarding. So
yeah.
And I had one other good example, Mike, and I'm not just saying this because it's you and I, but think about when we started work together in '97, and our project that we were doing, which was a year 2000 project for BAA.
Yeah.
And I actually think that was quite a high-performing unit. And when I think back to why that was, so for me, I enjoyed it and I learned a lot, and we were successful. So some of the characteristics of a high-performance environment, and I think we had a clear goal, which is obviously the date 2000 and making sure the airports were safe.
Yeah.
And it was a very purposeful goal. I mean, there was big consequences if we got it wrong. Absolutely. It was a rallying point. We had a great client to work with. I mean, there was a very clear team structure, which you sort of set. I mean, there was no ambiguity. And I remember, this is what I had to do. You guided me on how to do it. I think there was a growth mindset philosophy. So you let us do things that you knew were going to stretch us, and we were able to make mistakes. And there was tremendous expertise that was bestowed on us both by you and other senior people. So for me, there was quite a lot in that environment that we were in together that was high performing.
Yeah, and I think also for me that was an example of where the process of bringing a team together can work at its best, because I was able to bring together a group of people who actually met very much the characteristics that I wanted. I was able to specify the types of individuals. I didn't always get the person I wanted, or even people I knew. When you first came on, we'd not met, so there was no way I was going to say I want Charles, because I hadn't heard of you.
You're saying you didn't want me, Mike.
But one of the things I remember about that is that having, and I think it might have been after you moved on from the team, but having a team that was running well and a project that was actually kind of motoring along, it was following its plan. We had the capacity to deal with the problems that the project threw at us. So I'm not saying it was easy going, but I received some advice from another Deloitte colleague of ours. Said, Mike, when you've got a project that's running really well, you have a responsibility to use that project to good. And he told me about some work he'd done with an underperforming member of his team on a project of his. And around that time, I was allocated someone who came to join the team. And I was warned by 2 or 3 partners at Deloitte that this person was trouble and that I needed to keep records because they weren't going to last long. And I chose to, say to that person, what warnings come along with you. And we agreed that he knew the situation and he wanted to do something about it. I said, if you want to do something about it, I will help you. And we worked really hard together to improve his ability to deliver, to such an extent that the client actually wrote him a letter of commendation after the project. He was there through to the end and got that letter of commendation and went on. I every now and then I kind of see him on LinkedIn and see that he's almost certainly earning far more than I am. So we can use those high performing teams as a lever to do good, and I think that's such an important part. But having indulged our our nostalgia for our young days when we both had darker hair, to kind of put it into context, can you contrast what you've given with any specifics around what an underperforming team looks like, so we can actually get that analysis?
Yeah, again, I'm going to probably I've got 2 examples, I think.
And please don't choose one I was involved in.
So many to pick from. I think one was a client, and obviously I won't name them, but a big program. I was on it for a couple of years, and it was a dreadful experience. So it felt every day was very, very difficult. It was problem solving. It was firefighting. A lot of the management leadership was highly tactical. And I think, for me, a few things really. The foundations weren't there. And back to our project, I think when I landed, the foundations were there. So you jumped aboard something that was well set up. I think in this program, I'm thinking of the foundations weren't really there. And if you don't get those in place, you're constantly spinning rubber and in firefighting mode. senior sponsorship wasn't there. There was a bit of a lot of it came down to the culture. There was I would describe it as a bullying culture.
Yeah.
And there wasn't a respect or regard for the individuals. Some of that was the tone of the organization and the pressures that people were under. And we lost track of what we were trying to do. So we ended up delivering something. We were over budget, over time, got this thing out, celebrated, but what we launched was irrelevant, and it was no longer relevant to the target customers and market we were after. There's a whole lot in that I learned about cultures, environments, foundations, staying relevant, adjusting. And actually, this was done in the days when agile wasn't a big thing, and I can see the benefits of agile methodologies and approaches now to staying relevant. So that was one, and then the other one was a senior leadership team in a business. And every time I had to engage with that team, I felt a sense of dread, and there was a darkness that came over me. And again, it came back to trust and blame and hidden agendas and a lack of authenticity, no accountability. I believe in organizations, results, things roll up. You take accountability at the top table. There's nothing that should happen in a project or a business there isn't someone at the top table being accountable for.
Yeah.
I mean, you might be responsible, but that rolls up. And I saw no accountability. The dialogue was frequently about blaming people in the organization rather than accepting accountability. So quite often the underperforming teams for me have been probably a lack of vision, lack of end goal, lack of foundation, but then crucially the culture that exists within that team. And whether that's cause and effect, I don't know, but it's very distinct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you've got an underperforming team and you've diagnosed a number of reasons why a team can underperform, so I think we can start to suspect some of the things we need to do to fix it. But what's your prescription, doctor? How do we fix this?
Yeah,
how do we get it? And I don't know whether it's different, but if I've got a team that isn't underperforming because it's new, is there a way to get them straight there? What do we have to have?
Well, let me answer that last question first. I mean, I do think it takes time. I don't think you get there out of the blocks. And I think if you get there out of the blocks, you won't have gone through some of the phases to build the foundations to support you in the tough times. And I think everyone will be familiar with I always get them muddled up with the storming, forming, norming, performing.
Forming,
model.
storming, norming, and performing. Yeah.
And it does. That is something not to be overlooked. I mean, spending that time together, investing in it is very, very important. Yeah. So I do think you build a high-performing team and a high-performing culture, and then you have to continue to work to keep it there. Yeah, I think that's one point. Good news is I do think it's possible to turn around team performance.
Good.
So I think that can be done. And if you're a great, good leader, you can do that without having to change personnel. That's very gratifying. So I think there's two bits to it. There's what I call a high-performance system.
Right.
Kind of the building blocks, and then there's the sort of the culture you create. So I think those are the two constituent parts. And the system for me is pretty straightforward. It's not dissimilar to a project or program. So you need clarity around your vision and your strategy and your sort of goals and objectives, all of those. And then they need to have a purpose to them that is meaningful and impactful for the team. And purpose doesn't need to be something like saving the environment. Purpose could be for someone that it allows them to get promoted, or it does allow them to have a job for 6 months. So there can be small things that are purposeful at the individual level. So I think
does that mean that we should be sitting down with our team members at the beginning and finding out how they can use this opportunity personally to get something of value to them in their career? Well,
so that is something I would do.
Yeah,
and it does pay tremendous dividends, because quite often they'll say, well, nobody's ever asked me that question. And then now the health warning with that is you can't ask the question and do nothing with the information.
Yes.
So you have to remember it, and then you have to, where it becomes really powerful is where you give them the role or the opportunity to have that growth moment, or to try something, or to shadow someone. Yeah. So don't ask the question inauthentically.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. The next sort of bits, you've got your vision, your strategy, your goals and objectives. Then there's the piece around roles. So people understanding what they're there to do and how they fit with the other people and what the other people are doing. Yeah. And making sure there's not an imbalance. So I've been in exec teams where I've had execs saying, well, I do more than them. What are they doing? So you want to avoid that type of dialogue.
Yeah.
I then think there's the sort of the processes and systems which govern it all. So how do you how do you run your project, your rituals, your routines, crucially, the transfer of information within those. The communication piece is key. And then the networks you build within your project or your business are very important. So how does the system work? And then the final two things sort of in your system, I think, are leadership. You have all of those building blocks, then still have to lead and manage it. So that's important. And then, and I talked to it in terms of the culture as well, but this, your learning loop. So, you don't get everything right. As long as you get 75% of your decisions right, you acknowledge what you got wrong, learn from it, and move forward quickly. That's good enough. So I think having that underpinning all of that system is important. So those are kind of the sort of the foundational building blocks, I think.
And I think that's great, because the advantage I think that we have as project managers and program managers, we work on temporary efforts, and we're bringing a team together. We can reset that system, that whole set of individual aspirations, or understanding individual aspirations, setting up the network, setting up the systems and processes, and all of that, and we can do it again afresh each time. And
I agree with you.
It's a little bit like other aspects of setting up the project, because a lot of things you talked about, if you talked about that in the context of starting a project, it needs a clear goal, it needs a clear purpose, you need systems and processes. It's exactly the same. So it's almost like we've got a project within a project to get the team set up right.
Well, I agree with you, and I should suspect and I can't remember my Prince 2 methodology, but if you look back at those things, I'm sure there would be something around that. I think, and you're right, I think project teams have another advantage, which is some of those parameters are set for you. So by their nature, got time, cost, quality constraints. So you tend to have a time goal you're shooting for. You've got a budget and some quality guidance, and you approach those with a positive mindset. You've got some aspirational targets to hit or under or overachieve against, depending on which way you look at them. And so I think you've got some of your vision, strategy, goals, and objectives there by default in a project. Whereas in a business which is kind of open-ended, you have to go through an exercise regularly enough to create that almost false environment. Which is these 2 years we're doing this, 3 years we're doing that, and that's an important aspect of business leadership.
And it's also a bit more jarring if you're trying to recover an underperforming team to say, you know what, we're setting up some systems. And I know you wouldn't go into the room and say we're setting up some systems, but you have to do all of that from what you've been telling us to rebuild an underperforming team into a high performing team. But you also mentioned some cultural things alongside.
Absolutely. And now I think, but to your point about high performing teams, the sort of the leaders that I've seen be most compelling are those that find the leadership culture, set the leadership culture. They find it from within themselves, and they kind of give birth to that vision and the culture. And it does mean if you do that, you always tend to operate very authentically to that, because it's how you are naturally, and that's when it guides your decision making, your interaction, and it's very powerful when it's not a false or synthetic environment that's been created. So I think the culture to some extent gets given to you by the leaders you work under. And it's very powerful when their personality and value system aligned with the value system and the culture in the project. It's really powerful. So I'll chuck a bunch of, I don't know, they're adjectives, adverbs at you, and these are things that matter to me. But I am a big believer in empowerment. So and the flip side of that is probably accountability. So I like saying to people, give it a go, creating the right environment for them to do that. But if they don't succeed, you have to hold them to account. But that doesn't mean fire them. It means say, well, hold on, that was your thing. Probably the accountability is learn from how it went and then improve.
This is it. As a project manager, you never lose accountability for what your team is doing. Even if you delegate them the work and you give them a sense that they are responsible for it and they will succeed or fail on their own terms. But if you've made the choice to delegate that work and they have failed, then it's that there is a failing in you as well, because you've possibly made the wrong choice, or you possibly under supported them or under guided them.
So agree with you on that. I think trust is critical.
And
I mean, there's lots written on trust. You have to figure out your system for creating trust, but simple things like following through. For me, being transparent helped to create trust. I mean, I think there's a line where you can be too transparent, and there are issues with that. But I think find your system for creating trust. But it's very important. I think also feedback and recognizing what people do can build trust. I did do a bit of reading before this, and a word that came up a lot was conflict. And I'm not necessarily sure I agree with that, but there was something you actually once coached me on, which was about creating an environment where points of view can be heard.
Yeah.
And you talked to me about Japanese management techniques and sort of rising above the debate, drawing silent individuals in, getting different points of view, and then drawing your conclusions. And I think rather than conflict, I think for me, it's about giving people a voice where it's appropriate and valuing their point of view and creating some diversity in the thinking style that gives you a stronger answer.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a way of doing that. That doesn't mean you need to have all-out arguments.
Yeah, and my point of view on that is exactly that actually the conflict you want is that creative conflict, which is setting ideas against one another, not people against one another.
Yeah.
When you put the ideas together and you test them rigorously, but in a way where everyone is respectful of one another's personal integrities, that's what helps an organization to thrive and a project to thrive. And it also is what stops you making the easy decision that may turn out to be the wrong one. Yeah,
I agree with you. A couple of other ones, celebration. So I think it's important to note success. People love feedback. People love, being praised. It's part of human nature. So I think doing that. And one thing I did in a high-performing team I worked in was I sat with my EA once a month on a Friday, last Friday of every month, and we wrote postcards, anonymous postcards, to the top 25 people in the business we wanted to acknowledge, just calling out something they might not have seen that had been noticed. We didn't say it was from us, and they just got them. And I just think you can do lots of, and I heard of another business leader that used to walk around his office on a Friday and he had these stones, and he'd drop a stone onto the desk of certain individuals, and the stone entitled them to a £500 Amazon voucher. So I think there's very simple ways of making people feel valued and special and celebrating success. I think that's very important.
I came across another lovely way of doing the same thing, which I was visiting a client's site, and I very rarely went onto a particular floor. And I was up there waiting for the lift, and I noticed there was a notice board, and there were a load of postcards on that notice board. And rather than being written by the chief exec and his assistant, in this case, they were written by, anyone could grab an empty postcard and acknowledge something that had impressed them from one of their colleagues, and it was there, and they were refreshed from time to time because they each had a date on it. But I just thought that's just such a lovely thing there, and it wasn't there for clients to see because it was on a floor that it was very much part of the internal workings of the business rather than the external face. And yet, I wasn't a client; they were my client. But had I been a client, I would have been so impressed by this, and yet they chose to keep that personal amongst themselves because that's what it was for. Yeah,
I think very, very important symbolic gestures. The last couple, and this is particular to me, which I know other people find difficult to work with me, but for me, ambition and application are very important. So I've been analysed loads of times as a leader, and I know I have a high challenge threshold, which I've been told can make me difficult to work for and impossible to live with. But for me,
we'll ask your family about that last one.
But I expect people to, in my teams, I like to see people that want to get on, they want to learn, and they're prepared to give 100%. I don't expect them to do things I wouldn't do, but that's very important for me. Embracing challenge, solve problems, alignment. I talked about growth mindset, learning loops. And then the other really big one for me, which I think I've learned most distinctly in the last 5 years, is diversity. So, I talked about the North Highland, London operations team that I had in my business. It was a very diverse team, gender, cultural. There was a lot in their backgrounds. There was all sorts of diversity in it, and I really treasured that and learned a huge amount from that team. And I know it's a bigger bandwagon to jump on, but I've felt and seen the power of that firsthand, and it's part of how I will build businesses and teams going forwards.
That diversity. I always say that the project team I enjoyed working with most in some ways. I got the most out of. And you were there as well. It wasn't the one we were talking about, but when you and I were working out in Holland, and we had people flying in from 22 different Deloitte offices in 19 different countries, and that in itself was a delight. That kind of breadth, and you know who I'm talking about.
We could talk about that team for a while, but not today.
Some real characters there, but I think that's right. And diversity works in terms of delivering results. Every piece of research I've read says that if you want to get cleverer, more innovative solutions to problems, if you want to make smarter, wiser, more robust decisions, then get yourself a diverse team. As long as you have the processes in place to make sure that, again, you get that respectful listening rather than just because a diverse team is much harder to corral, because you've got to work hard at understanding one another and listening to each other. But I think that's absolutely right.
So that was it, really, a bit about the sort of the system that underpins everything, and then I think find the formula that works for you, but create a culture that's authentic. And as the leader, if you're up and committed to it and excited by it, then that will reflect into your team, and great things happen.
Yeah, I am a little worried by your statement that you wouldn't expect anyone to do something you wouldn't. You're a man who has run hundreds of miles across the Sahara Desert and swum the English Channel and done all sorts of other things. You've been to one of the poles, haven't you, as well?
Not quite yet, but I've done a couple of trips to the Arctic, and the North Pole's on my agenda, although I'm weighing that up with the environmental impact. So we'll see. So
the fact that that you wouldn't you wouldn't expect anyone to do something you haven't done, you wouldn't do. It's setting the bar, as you say, very, very high. I think we're probably coming towards an end. Any last tips or last thoughts to kind of put a tail to all the great ideas you've given us?
I'll probably emphasize one point, which is, I think any team and any individual has the ability to be high performing. I think it's tough to stay there. So I don't think you're high performing all the time, all of your life. So I think everyone has that potential. And I think the point I'd add to that is it doesn't happen overnight. So I think, we talked about hard work. I think you also have to be purposeful about setting your mind to it, and be quite introspective and truthful to yourself about the gaps, and then figure out your path to high performance and how you might define it. And then I truly believe everyone can get there and enjoy those periods of success, which are, the good thing about when you have them is the growth that comes from it, and you never lose that. It's like if you looked at your career or your life as a set of stairs, a period of high performance is taking some steps up there, and you don't come back down. You build, and you always have that to draw on and share with others. So I think it's one of the most exciting aspects of both project life, personal careers. Go forth and seize it.
Yeah, it's very much, as Anders Ericsson said, you need that 10,000 hours, but you also need deliberate practice throughout that 10,000 hours. You can't just coast along for 10,000 hours.
Right. Exactly right.
So that's nice. Yeah. So Charles, you have taken a new step in your career. As we're talking, you're not that many months into your new role. For people who are interested in what you're doing and your ideas, firstly, what are you doing at the moment? And secondly, how can people kind of connect with you if they're interested in that?
Yeah. So big milestone this year, I turned 50. So I was quite purposeful about saying, what do I want to get out of the next 10 years of my life and career? And I did a bit of introspection myself and wrote a mission statement last summer. And I kind of worked back from that and said, how do I get to where I want to be when I'm 60? So I'm doing three things. I'm doing a bit of teaching at Side Business School on high performing, high growth professional services firms. The second thing, and I'd like to do more of that in the future, I've taken a non-exec role. So I'm trying out some board work for a data science company called DataSpark. And it's a world I don't know very well, but certainly know how to grow professional services firms, which they are, so helping them with that. And then my main role is with our firm called Roboyo, and they are a German intelligent automation business, as you mentioned at the start. We do automation consulting, we implement automation technology, and then we do automation outsourcing. And my job is to launch and build that business in the UK, and then to support the growth in the US. So that's what I'm up to. If people want to get in touch, connect on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. And
down below.
down below. Yeah, and we're hiring, we're selling, we're looking to build some extraordinary experiences in those two businesses. So if you're interested, get in touch.
Yeah, and of course, process automation is something I know PMI is taking an interest in the way they foresee project management futures. So that could be something to look into. That's absolutely fantastic. Charles, it's been a delight to speak with you, as it always is. Thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Cheerio.
Please do give us a thumbs up if you like this video. I'll be creating loads more great project management content. So please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of it. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.